a powerful data point about how much American citizens are dying to vote for person over party. And in Colorado, like many other states, they're prevented from doing so. Our system unleashes them and makes their voters make their votes count again, which will lead to new people running that are more responsive to the entire electorate in a district, not just a sliver.
Should we have an open primary and maybe ranked choice voting? The man who's pushing this idea is Kent Thiry. Kent, thanks for being, appreciate it. Before we get into that subject, you have pushed a lot of initiatives here and you put a lot of money into legal changes here. Why? What is compelling you to have open primaries in this? What, in general, you helped get rid of the Gallagher Amendment. What are you trying to prove? Who are you trying to impress?
It's just a good old-fashioned person who loves democracy and believes that democracy is, history shows us, has been a fragile experiment and remains one. And if people who've been lucky like me don't step up and help keep democracy modern and fluid and healthy, no one else will. And so I'm lucky enough and have been fortunate enough that I get to work on this beautiful thing called healthy democracy.
How to put this gently? You have a bit more money than I have. I am very impressed that you're out front on the issues that you have been putting money into. So these are your issues. Let me go back a few years back. Was it 2016 that your initiative to open the primaries to unaffiliated voters passed? And that means, for people who don't know, if you're unaffiliated, you get both a Republican and a Democratic primary, and you can vote in either. At the time, I thought it was a horrific, ultra terrible, smelly idea, and I thought it was wrong. I have come around on this one. I don't want to say you're right because it might lead for ego problems, but it does seem to be able to get candidates who are more winnable in the general and push some of the extremes that can't win or shouldn't, well, I might win, and it gets people involved earlier. Why that one? Was that a step along the way to what you're doing this year?
Yeah, it was a step along the way, not like I had a master plan or anything, or we had a master plan, but we knew there were multiple steps that would need to be taken. It is just so wrong back in 2016 to take 1/3 of our electorate and tell them that they have no right to vote in a primary. These are taxpayer-funded elections. The taxpayers are paying for them. They should be able to set the rules. And now, of course, we're up to 48% independent, I prefer to unaffiliated. And so this was all about trying to make sure that the principle of proportional representation lives on in Colorado and American democracy. Right now, the far left and the far right have disproportionate power. They deserve their sliver of support. What they don't deserve is disproportionate influence and power.
But couldn't I argue that with the primaries the way they were, you're not taking away anyone's right not to vote in a primary. You just have to be a member of the team that you're voting to get, which is, you just go on the website and you say, I'm a Republican, and you vote in the Republican primary. So nobody's being denied the vote. It's just that a lot of people aren't involved and don't want to get involved in the primary. I always thought that was a dumb thing. You're missing a huge chance to be very impactful. But you're not taking away anyone's right to have a closed primary. They still have a right to vote.
Yeah, I actually think the opposite is true. Just as the right to affiliate and right to associate is a constitutional right, the right to not be associated with it is equally powerful from a constitutional point of view. And after we passed the semi-open primary initiative in 2016, I remember a dinner I had at a restaurant called Fruition, and a couple came up, probably 55 years old, and said, "Are you Kent Thiry?" And I took a quick look to see if they had a gun, and I didn't see any gun, so I said, "Yes, I am." And they just said, "Thank you." And they literally teared up, and they said, "We can now vote in primaries again." We hated not voting in primaries, but the only one thing we hated more was somebody to pretend we were a Democrat or a Republican in order to exercise our constitutional right to vote. And to me, that speaks volumes, that the parties have so much lost touch with so much of the American electorate that the notion that they parties are not even in the Constitution. The notion that they should get to set the rules for what should be the people's primary is ridiculous. And what we're doing is giving the power back to the voters, not to the parties.
But doesn't it welcome mischief? Now, I'm in Boulder. I have been a Republican since I was 18. Nerdy enough to do it on my 18th birthday. Before I had a beer, I registered to vote and registered as a Republican. I like being able to vote in the primaries now because there was no primary in Boulder for a Republican. Maybe there would be a placeholder, but they'd never win. So I became unaffiliated, and I'm happy I did that. But I'm doing that so I can mess around in their primary. So doesn't that encourage more of what I'm doing?
I don't think so. The track record of American voters and Colorado voters is very clear. Most of them absolutely vote their conscience. And while political parties and maybe some political operatives do mischief, 95% of American citizens will not do it and have not done it and don't play those kind of games. So in fact, another argument for what we're about, giving more power back to the people, is they are far less likely to do mischief. Let's just look at the last cycle where the Democrats put $44 million into promoting MAGA candidates in different Republican primaries across the country. That's terrible mischief. That's evil mischief, and the Republicans were doing proportional things. But those are the parties. Those aren't the people. In general, Americans will vote their conscience, and our system will now enables them to have a voice even in districts when they're a minority.
As I said, I slowly and very reluctantly have come around to your point of view on the open primaries. And it's mostly because I've seen terrible Republicans win in the primary and then lose in the general because they're so awful. Or the other way around, terrible Democrats, but the wrong person wins the primary there, and that's why we have so many socialists now in the legislature. So I see it this way. Tell me about the proposal you're really investing in. It has two major components. I want to talk about the first part first. How do primaries work if your initiative passes?
Right. It's a tidy three-step process that has so many virtues that we'll get to talk about, I hope. But step number one is an all-candidate primary. Everybody on the same ballot, Ds, Rs, Libertarians, Independents, et cetera. All-candidate primary. Number two step is the top four advance to the general. And step number three is allowing the voters to rank their preferences rather than have some runoff election a month later at great expense and with far less interest. That step number one, that all-candidate primary, fits with the principle that every American voter should be able to vote for whomever they want in a taxpayer-funded election. And no party should be able to get in their way from doing that. Parties can do whatever they want to determine who they advocate for on that ballot, but that ballot is something that every American voter should be able to pick whomever they want. The second step, the top four advance, does wonderful things because it means you not only get the far left person, like a Bernie Sanders, you get Amy Klobuchar, the center left. You not only get the Donald Trump far right, but you get the Jeb Bush center right.
There's no guarantee of that.
No guarantee, but in many, many states, if you go back and look at the data, that's what you would have. And when you do that, you suddenly now are giving the voters real choices. And the 65% of the voters are driving the choice rather than what exists today, where the plurality winner, first past the post, winner takes all, means that people like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump get 35, 36% of the vote in the primaries, but that's more than anyone else. And they are able to sweep through, collect the votes, and be the nominee, when 65% of the population wouldn't have wanted either one of those. In our system, it means that, gosh, I'm voting for Jeb Bush first. My number two choice for most Jeb Bush voters is Amy Klobuchar, not Donald Trump. Look at all those Amy Klobuchar voters. For most of them, their number two choice is Jeb Bush, not Bernie Sanders. The 65% of America are back in the driver's seat for determining who our leaders are.
Let's talk about the open primary first. Denver has an open primary system. And we see it every time that we have a mayor. We have 17 people we've never heard of running, and they all do these ridiculous debates where there's 20 people on one stage, and it's just, you don't know. And whoever has the most money seems to pop up, and those two people who win go into a runoff. So you're talking about that first part is going to be very much like that. So for any statewide seat, by the way, this is for governor, Congress, Senate, state house, and rep.
And all state legislative positions.
Okay.
Yes.
Not your local school board or anything like that.
No.
Okay. So the first part of this is that huge. Anybody can really run easily, which means I got to go find out about 17, 18 people and compare them. I kind of liked it when I was just in my Republican primary because there's 2, 3, 4 people I can get to know them, but 20 people, I don't know if I got the space for that.
But if it's 20, that means that we're going to be 10. If you had 2 different ballots still, a Democrat and Republican, you'd have 10.
Or you could have a bunch of unaffiliated, so you could have 4 and 4 and the rest.
But that could happen today still. And that's why we allow the top 4 to advance, because it means that everybody gets to go and look at that list of 10 or 12 names. Maybe they didn't do research on each one, but they have an impression of several of them, and they pick the one they're most attracted to. And that way you give the electorate this very manageable number, 4, to look at with much more rigor. And so the primary is, as primaries always are, always often a little messy because of the number of people. That's okay, because by letting the top 4 advance, you make sure that you get the most popular folks from whatever philosophical place they're coming from in front of the electorate for the general election.
Let me get wonky. I don't want to lose you on this, but this is an important difference with your proposal compared to what people say is ranked choice voting. Most ranked choice voting options is only that first part. So you'd have one election, and let's say 15 people are running, and then you would rank those 15 people. You've decided to have something slightly different, which is call that a primary,
right?
And then the top 4 go on to a ranked choice voting.
Correct.
Why did you think that was important rather than open it up, the whole thing, to ranked choice?
For exactly the reason that you brought it up before. The number of candidates can be quite large. And so step 1 is to get it to be a smaller group where the people can really stare at and compare. And the people running get to really decide what segments of the population they're going to appeal to the most. But it has to be a majority because they no longer can win with a plurality. And so by having that first step of narrowing it down, both the candidates and the voters pick up a greater ability to exercise judgment.
I believe Colorado is changing. A lot of it has to do with what you passed in 2016. Go back 20 years ago, most voters were Republicans, then Democrats, then unaffiliated. Go back 10 years, they were a third, and now it's completely flipped. Nearly 50% of all voters are unaffiliated, and then Democrats and Republicans are the minority party. I've said this before, and people think I'm crazy, but I believe Colorado could become the first unaffiliated state. That is, death to both parties. I don't like you, and I don't like you. And so I'm going to work for the person. I particularly think that could be true in suburban districts, those swing districts that always get gerrymandered.
Yes.
The left has done a wonderful job making sure that there's an arm in the district that goes out to a suburban area to get that. What I like about the first part, your jungle primary or open primary, is that unaffiliated candidates could win. From my point of view, I think unaffiliated candidates could win in suburban areas, and from my point of view, work with Republicans on lower taxation, lower regulation, bringing more business in, but they won't worry about the social issues. They're not going to be anti-abortion or anti-gay or anti-weed. And so I could see that working. So I really love that first part. I never thought I would, but I think Colorado could be that first truly unaffiliated state. Let me ask you about that first.
Can I sneak in one factoid? Because it speaks to exactly what you're talking about. How about what we are proposing gets voters more engaged and is going to lead to them having some new choices. In Alaska, that passed very, very similar reforms. 52% of Alaska voters voted a split ticket, meaning they voted for a Republican for governor and a Democrat for senator. Just a powerful data point about how much American citizens are dying to vote for person over party. And in Colorado, like many other states, they're prevented from doing so, that they're not allowed. And so you take, because right now so much of the state is in party dominated districts. Literally 80% of our legislative districts are party dominated by the Ds or the Rs. And that's not going to change for the next 20 years, or maybe there's some work we can do on it going forward. What that means for 80% of our districts, immediately 35, 40%, the minority party, are permanently disenfranchised. They can look at the next 20 years of their voting. They're not going to cast a meaningful vote for a single legislative office at the state or federal level because of the stickiness of that district and the fact that they're a minority. And so as our system unleashes them and makes their voters make their votes count again, which will lead to new people running that are more responsive to the entire electorate in a district, not just a sliver.
There's a third option, which is other parties and unaffiliated candidates can run anyway. So as the Republican Party has just been decimated in Colorado, which I think is a good thing because it needs to hit bottom before it can rebuild, you can have another party. You can bring up a third party. You can bring up an unaffiliated candidate. All those people are welcome to run in primaries now. All they have to do is go through a different party or run as an unaffiliated.
Right.
Do you really need to have the open jungle primary to do that?
It is true in the current system that minor parties or independents can get on the general election ballot very, very easily. And so that opportunity already exists. What we're trying to address is creating a change to the system that is consistent with the notion of our two-party system, but gets back to where voters that believe in compromise and believe in governance are proportionally represented. So that we don't imagine there's any such thing as a dramatic change in what an independent can do. But what we are doing is making sure that independents and Ds and Rs have the right to actually vote on alternative candidates that are serious.
So my friend Mike Rosen, former talk show host, his voice is echoing in my ear right now. He'd be saying something like, you don't vote for personality. You don't vote for the person. You vote for the party. And the reason you vote for the party is because the party that's in leadership has incredible amounts of power. That's the way it works at the legislature. And so you look at these people, you vote for the party because if that party wins, then your basic philosophy has a chance of actually moving in law. And he's right that if Republicans win in the legislature, they choose the speaker, they choose the president of the Senate, they choose the committees, they choose what bills go through. And so, yeah, you might not like that Republican or Democrat, but if you want the reforms you want, the policy changes, you need to vote for the party, not the person. You don't agree?
We have the opposite point of view. Certainly, I think an individual voter will take something like that into account. They say, gosh, I'd like the Republican Party or the Democratic Party to have sort of leadership influence. And so I'm going to vote, I'm going to have a bias towards voting Democratic or Republican. But as we saw in Alaska with 52% of people voting a split ticket, most of them would have self-identified as pretty consistently left or right. But that doesn't mean 100% of the time they want to vote D or R. It means that most of the time they want to vote D or R, in part because of the reasons that Rosen would stipulate. But the power for the fluidity of our democracy, when even just 20% of the time, 25% of the time, they say, wow, but there's a great Republican there. And so even though I vote 85% Democratic, I'm going for him or her, or the opposite. That's what takes an average or hurting or deteriorating democracy and converts it back into something that's healthy and engaged, and with people listening and voting with more energy, because it's not just some sort of rote definition. And I remind you, in our state, we have hundreds of thousands of voters who would like to vote a split ticket, and the current system says you can't.
Of course you can. In the general, you can vote a split ticket. In fact, it has been Colorado tradition up until recently to do so. We usually have a Republican legislature governor that's a different party, or the party, our representatives are Republican, our senators Republican, somebody else could be a Democrat. We've always done that split. So you can do that split. You just have to go through the parties or get on the ballot.
And let's talk about the numbers, because theoretically those words sound nice, but let's just look at the aggregate facts that right now 80% of districts party dominated, left or right. So all those people in the minority are looking at their entire adult life without ever casting a meaningful vote for legislative seats in our state, at the federal state. That's really bad for a democracy, really bad. But even worse, if you then look at those 80% that are party dominated, where the primary is the general doesn't matter. You couldn't even get a bet placed in Vegas because no one would bet against what's going to happen. So you start off with 80% of the time, the primary is the general. But then let's add to that, 75% of those party dominant primary races, it only has one viable candidate. If there's another person or two, that they're going to pick up a smattering of the vote. This is why we only have 26% turnout for our primaries, because voters look at that and say, there's no choices here. So we like to brag about our turnout for general elections, which is great for statewide offices and initiatives. It's wonderful. We should be proud of vote by mail. We should be proud of our turnout. But for all the legislative races where the primary is the general, turnout's 26%, and voters are not allowed to vote for the person over the party. And that, changing that, would lead to a whole new level of dynamism and creativity and accountability in our system.
I am actually sold on the first part of your plan, the jungle primary. Now, mind you, I've noticed you haven't used the word jungle primaries because I'm sure some salesman said, we don't use a term like jungle primary, but that's what it's been called forever.
All candidate open primaries we prefer.
Oh my God, that's too politically correct. I'll keep with jungle primary. I like it. And I do believe it would serve Colorado better to have those type of primaries. But I would like to see the top 2, not the top 4. So I really want to dive into this part. You've got to convince me about the ranked choice voting part because I'm naturally suspicious. I'm less suspicious now that it's only 4 and not a bunch of them.
Right.
But let me bring up two of my concerns. The first one is what you've been talking about, that so many voters are disenfranchised or feel disenfranchised. But with ranked choice voting, you have a guy who's in office that only 30% of the people wanted. What I don't like about ranked choice voting is that it doesn't narrow it down to an election where that person gets 50 plus 1. I wonder if there's an ethical issue when you say we're going to elect a new governor, but only 26% of Colorado was he the first choice, or maybe it was the third choice, but it all worked out that way. He never got a true mandate from the voters of getting a majority of them to say yes. And we've seen this in South American countries where whoever gets the top vote does it. And so you get some crazy guy who got 20%, but he got more than everybody else. I feel it's important that somebody get the majority. That gives them the ethical authority that the majority ruled in a democracy.
Yeah.
Tell me why I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, we totally agree on that principle, and so it'd be fun to play with. The act of moving, if when the top 4 advance, if no one gets a majority on the first ballot, a majority of first place votes, you could wait a month. You could take off the bottom person and then hold another election. And if no one gets over 50, you could take the bottom person out and hold another election. And then you would get to the point where you only have 2 left. With allowing voters to make their preferences, you save all the money and time and hassle and voter fatigue because it all happens at once. You do have to get a majority because once you take out that 4th person, you don't say, let's wait a month and have a whole new election with another $40 million spent. Instead, you say, no, we know what their number 2 choice was. And if we made them wait a month and do a runoff, then you would get what you want, all the first place votes. But you can get them for a fraction of the cost and all in 24 hours if you take out that bottom person and just use the ranked number 2s instead of holding another special election. There's also another thing that's wrong with the way the current twosome system works, which is spoilers, which is another cancer on the body politic. Right now, in Colorado, we had multiple races decided not by whether or not the Republican or Democrat had 50% plus 1. No, it was whether did the Democrats do a better job of placing a libertarian to bleed votes from the R side, or did the Republicans do a better job in planting an environmental candidate to bleed votes on the Democratic side? And we had multiple races last year where no one got over 50%, and the winner was not the person who would have. It was just more a contest of who did worse, the environmentalist or the libertarian. So it's another cancer. Voters hate that when that happens, when they find out and they say, John would have gotten over 50%. But the fact that a libertarian took more votes away than the environmentalist is what determined the outcome. That's not real democracy.
You said we could wait a month and have another election, drop one off, have another election, and then finally have the final runoff. What I like about that is it's a different election. And so I understand with ranked choice voting, you take the guy who got the least number of votes and say, yeah, he's gone. Now let's recount everything only with those three candidates. But it is a different election. It is a different dynamic. So with four guys, I might go, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now with three guys, I might go, well, given that quandary, I might change my ranking. But I'm not allowed to change my ranking under your system. I got to do it right there, right then. And so it's not a runoff and a runoff and a runoff where you can actually have a different dynamic, a different campaign with different issues. You're presupposing what everybody else wants for those next elections. I've got a real issue with that one.
Yeah, I have no problem if someone wants to run an initiative to propose a series of runoff elections, each discrete. I think that's a respectable position, and someone could run it and see if the people like it. The data is pretty clear, however, from across the country, that places that have those multiple elections and delayed runoffs, that the voter turnout goes way down, that campaign spending becomes all the more significant because unless you have massive resources, you can't afford to tee up for another election because you were spending thinking there was going to be a result in the first one. And so I theoretically totally respect your idea. And if the people preferred it, I would support it. In general, people that do that are moving away from it because it's so expensive and the turnout is so poor. And so the people have spoken that they prefer the efficiency of ours. There's over 50 locations across America that are doing ranked voting now. And in time after time after time, people understand it and like it. And part of it is because it's all at one time. I can say, Caldeira's my first choice, but I know who my number two choice is.
First choice.
Yeah.
Just talk to any ex-girlfriend.
Anyway, theoretical.
Agreed. This is why I wish you just did the first part, where you had two people come out of the mess. Then you had the runoff there.
Can I tell you another thing that's wrong with the top two?
Please.
It just happened again in California, which has had top two for about 15 years. And what I'm about to tell you happens about 1 out of every 65 races in California, where if you have top two, it can be gamed in the following way. It just happened that a Democrat running for United States Senate in California helped raise a bunch of money to get a Republican in as the number two in the primary, and knowing that the Republican could not win in the general. So you had a Democrat funding a Republican because they knew they could beat the Republican in the general. And in about 1 out of 65 elections in California, you get that kind of perversion. In top four, you can't game it because you have to get to 50.1, and you can't possibly help a couple people that can get through the third and fourth candidate spots. And so that's another big flaw of top two.
I imagine you must have struggled with the decision to put both jungle primary, ranked choice voting into the same initiative.
Yes.
And I wrote a column on this, which you obviously did not read because you did not take my advice.
Yeah.
I said you should have done the jungle primary in one initiative and then move towards ranked choice.
Well, we almost changed it after your article.
I'm sure you did not, but thank you for saying that. How tempted were you to run these as two different things, and why didn't you?
We talked about it a lot, but for us, it's kind of a hand in glove. You know, if you got a pitcher throwing the ball, you need a catcher to catch it. That's the system, the pickups, the advantages of the integrated system are so much more than the two discrete parts. The all-candidate primary with top four, if you don't pass allowing voters to rank their preferences, if you don't pass ranked voting, you've got a very awkward situation with 4 people. You have to have some sort of mechanism for dealing with that. And so we believe by putting the two together, you take that big group that you referred to, get it down to a manageable number, then you let the voters compare and rank their preference, so somebody has to get over 50%, but they're not having to do 2 elections. That system has the most virtue by putting the two together hand in glove.
Why not? And my libertarian friends would hurt me if I didn't mention this, although they're libertarians, they can't punch as well. Why not use what's known as approval voting for those final 4, which is a voting method that people are not aware of as much, but it just says you can vote for as many candidates as you want. So those final 4, you could vote for 1, 2, 3, you can vote for all of them if you like. That way you could have your protest vote and somebody else and do it that way. Why not do it that way, which is, I know I would understand if I said, just let the top vote getter, but you'll probably say, no, then he only gets 30% of the vote. So why not do approval voting for that instead?
Yeah,
which seems a lot simpler, a lot faster, and a lot easier to audit.
Yeah, we thought about approval voting, and our biggest hesitation there was not with the potential merits, but with the fact that almost no one is doing it or has done it for any period of time.
Has that ever stopped you before?
Only
you've made a career and an incredible business out of doing things the way people haven't done before.
But we pay a lot of attention to precedent and experience and people who have accumulated scars that we can benefit from. So why be bold if you don't have to be? And so for us, there's 50, 60, 70 places across America who do the ranked voting. There's only a couple that do approval voting. And so we were just uncomfortable putting Colorado in a position that was so untested. But I think the logic and the theory of approval voting is very sound. It's just that we didn't want to be that much of a path breaker.
All right, you said these guys did it and they've had the scars. Let's talk about some ranked choice voting scars. You keep talking about Alaska. Alaska is a very Republican state, yet a Republican did not win the congressional seat there. And I got to scratch my head going, wait a second. How in the world did this happen? It wouldn't have happened with ranked choice voting, or it would have happened with ranked choice voting. It would not have happened the other way. So let's go with that one. And then before you jump, because I know you already have an answer already, I can see you're ready to bat that one out. Also, the issues of the auditing. When New York did it, it seemed like it took weeks to find out who the mayor was going to be. So let's do Alaska. Let's do that, and then we're going to do San Diego, my friend.
Oh, that'll be a new one. So on Alaska, first of all, Peltola won a majority. She cleared 50%. So without ranked voting, she would have been the winner. But let's put that aside for a moment. In Alaska is not a Republican state. There's 28% of registered voters are Republican in Alaska, which is twice as many as the Democrats at 14. But it's 55% independent with strong libertarian inclinations, which you should embrace. But they are fiercely non-Republican. And so what happened in this election, it's always been regarded as a Republican state because in a world of closed primaries, the Republicans dominated because there were twice as many of them. In a world where all those independent voters matter, suddenly the Republicans have to attract a broader audience, which they didn't do. So what happened is, the Republicans continued to manage towards their base, which is what they were used to. They didn't really notice that was only 28%. And Mary Peltola, the Democrat, focused on the 55% that was independent. And yes, most of them leaned center-right, but they are not Republicans. They are center-right independents.
She won because she has an Italian-sounding name. Go to New York.
New York, it did take a while, but it wasn't.
We would call that, what's the technical word they use in politics? A clusterfuck.
Yeah, that's unfortunately apt. The two things. Number one, most of what led to the delay had nothing to do with ranked voting. It had to do with, they have a pretty bad bureaucracy there for all their elections. And they tend to always be slow and that often have to do with corrections and amendments. So they're not a perfect vessel for any form of democracy. And then second, they demonstrated a bit of hubris. Uh, there are wonderful national partners that we have who will help with the technology, who will help with the risk limiting audits, who will help with the voter education material. And when we do that, things go really smoothly, like Alaska. When you have hubris and you think your bureaucracy, which everyone knows has been an underperforming bureaucracy for decades, and you say nonetheless that we can do it without any help, then you get some problems. But there were no issues with the integrity of the election. There were no issues with the voter popularity of the election. People understood it and liked it, but it took way too damn long and had some mistakes, and that was because of New York hubris, which will never happen here in Colorado. We will make sure the clerks have the resources they need to get the job done, just like they did with vote by mail, which was much more difficult than what we're talking about here, and just like they did with semi-open primaries, which was just as difficult.
Will there be a paper trail? I think having paper ballots is crucial. So will you be able to audit this? And when somebody says, I want to recount, you're actually going to have to recount 4 elections.
Well, and again, if you did instant runoffs and the rest, you end up with multiple elections as well. I actually don't know the answer about paper trail. My impression is yes, but that kind of detail we'll be working out with the county clerks in the implementation planning. So I don't pretend, in some of these things, the clerks know better than I and we about exactly how to manage some of the operating detail. But my hypothesis would be that there will be a trail.
San Diego had a school board race.
I'm not familiar with this, so you'll have to give me the...
Yeah, and it was a ranked choice voting system. 6 months after the election, after the new guy was sworn in, they found out he didn't win the election. Because this is not a simple matter of one election recounting and go, yeah, you won, we just did that. You got to do it 4 times, and over there it could have been more, I don't know. But you got to recount a bunch of elections. So it is a much more cumbersome system than approval voting or just having the top 2.
First, I think it was Oakland, not San Diego.
I think you're right. I think it was Oakland.
Because it's the only...
It was a school board race, and from what I hear, you're promoting this because you hate children.
So I know of the Oakland example. And first, it's noteworthy that people have to search all over. And with 50, 60, 70 places doing this for years and years and years, the fact that people just search all over and find one ignores the fact that we're comparing our proposed system to a system that is generating results that are not proportionally representative of the American people 75% of the time. Right now, 75% of our elections are not handled in a way that's fair and proportionally and proportional. So let's just first remember what we're comparing to, which is a system that's broken, and most Americans agree with that. But still, 1 out of 10,000 is still too many. This was another case where it was one of our national partners, nonprofits that offer their services, that caught the mistake. They never even caught it in that district. Our community did. And it's another example is that if you take advantage of the free resources that are offered, including all the algorithms to do the counting, which is as simple as when people fill out their Final Four little thing for predicting the NCAA basketball, it is not complicated. It's not complicated at all to go 1 through 4.
I can't compare the Final Four betting to the bedrock of our democracy, which is...
They're both very popular.
Yeah, they're both pretty popular. You've answered most of my questions on this one. Is this a step towards something else? In other words, you have you led the fight against Gallagher, which I damn you for, because I think that was a mistake, without getting a replacement first. You did open primaries. I'm trying to remember, you've been involved in several other initiatives. So I can't imagine if this passes, Ken Thiry's just going to go out to pasture.
Some days sounds quite attractive. I'm retired now from my business life. I just do a little bit of consulting, but 2/3 of my adult life is now dedicated to our state, our country, and the world, trying to do good. I've been stunningly lucky in my life, and I'd like to put that money to work to try to do social good. And I'm focused on 3 areas: democracy, number 1, the environment, number 2, and equitable education for low-income kids, number 3. And so no matter what happens this fall, I'll be continuing to work in those 3 arenas spending about 40 hours a week on them and allocating the money that we were so lucky to accumulate and try to put it to work for our kids and grandkids. That's kind of old-fashioned stuff, but I've always hoped I would be able to reach a stage of life where that's what I could do, and now I get to do it.
You got to tell me this answer. I know what the answer's coming. You've seen polling. How does this look? Is it a constitutional amendment? Or?
No, statutory.
So you only need 50%. Now be honest. How's it looking?
It looks very good.
See, that's the lie I was waiting for. Give me a number.
I don't think we're at this point disclosing the number publicly, but we may be doing it shortly because it's as positive as it is. And it cuts across the parties and it cuts across age groups. But in particular, young people love it. People, I count young as 40 and under now, and they absolutely love it. These are the ones that are like my daughter's 33 and my son is 35. And so all they've seen of democracy is what they've seen the last 12 years. And they go, Dad, should you be spending your time on this? Because it looks pretty broken. And for our generation, our friends, it doesn't look so good that you end up with Trump and Biden, and then you end up with someone who didn't get a single vote. And, so Dad, just you can see any inheritance money going away.
Well, they didn't earn it, so that's fine.
You're damn right. Damn right. And so that's, I guess, that's what I would say there.
People want to get more information about this. Where do they go?
Our website is coloradovotersfirst.com, and it's got pretty good information. It can also send an email to me directly at kt@kentthiry.com, because we feel so strongly the more we get out and discuss this, the more and more people are going to be in favor. But it starts out so high because I'll take 1 second here. A year ago, we did the first set of polling, and it came back, and I was very surprised. I said, Coloradans are not that unhappy. This is a bad poll, because things are going pretty well here in the state compared to others and all the rest. Of course, we got our problems. So I waited 4 months, we did the polling again. Came back the same. Waited 4 more months, did it a third and final time. And people are feeling frustrated, angry, and or worried about democracy. And including in our state, they feel the fact that, if you combine the math I told you, about 80% of districts are party dominated, and 75% of those, there's only one viable candidate. If you do the math, it means literally only 13% of Colorado voters cast a meaningful vote for a legislative office last year. 87% did not. 87% of the time, you couldn't even have placed a bet in Vegas because no one would have bet against the prediction of who's going to win, all of that. People feel that. People, good American citizens, D's, R's, and I's, feel that their democracy that they care about and respect is breaking down. And our system will literally fix that.
It's not like it hasn't been tried. Denver had ranked choice voting. Go back 100 years, that was a standard, and we didn't like it. I don't know what year we changed it, but Denver used to have ranked choice voting, and they didn't like it.
I don't know that history, so I don't know what happened if something went wrong. Certainly.
I very much like having one over on you, so I'm going to take that one. You're pretty confident in this, but you got to.
No, I think we have a very good chance because the polling is very good and we're well organized.
Do you have any last question?
And we're on the right side of history.
Every tyrant says that. Do you have any endorsers yet that would raise eyebrows? Because it seems like both parties don't like this. I would imagine Democrats especially don't like this since they've got a lockhold on every bit of power in Colorado. Is there any big name out there that has come out and said, this is for me?
We do have a few, a growing stable that we're not ready to disclose yet, but we've got some very, very good ones they're going to make quite a difference.
Can you give me their initials?
I'm sorry.
Ken, thank you for standing up and taking these questions. I think it's a great discussion, and you gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah, as is true in reverse. So thank you so much and for putting a spotlight on this.
It's worth doing. Thanks.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. and subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.